Modern money mechanics? Is it some communist propaganda? Is it some fringe publication based on internet research? No, it was published by the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. And so it's a fairly interesting one. I'm not really sure why they produced it. Instead, the loan is invented on the spot from nowhere based on the wonders of the fractional reserve laws, which demand that, just like the goldsmith, somewhere in the region of 10% of that amount needs to be backed by the bank's reserves, which in this case, of course, it is, because 10 grand is easily covered by their 10 million reserves. So the couple have borrowed the 10 grand, now deposit it in a rival bank. That bank, however, can't behave exactly as the first bank, which simply lend out 100 grand based on 10 grand as the 10% deposit rate. What Bank 2 has to do is divide the 10 grand by the reserve requirement itself. So 1,000 becomes the bank's reserves and 9,000 is then lent out as new loans. Does this money come out of the existing 10 grand? No. Once again, it's actually created out of thin air. That 9,000 can then be borrowed and deposited at yet another bank, which can then lend out 8,100, and so on and so on. Every bank in the world does this. Every transaction produces more money to the tune of 90% of its own numerical value, meaning that from 10 grand in loans, you could actually produce 100 grand in completely new money. And if you're already way ahead of me, you might be wondering where the money comes from to pay the interest. For all loans come at interest. Every loan in the process of money creation is at interest, and the commercial banks will eventually have to pay the central bank back at interest as well. Given that you have to pay back more than you borrowed, someone will end up with the short straw, and with defaults on payments, mortgages, and so on. This is where the tent cities are coming from in the US and even the UK now. So who creates the money to repay the interest? Yes, it's the banks, in the form of new loans. Shout when you see the one that you have. Even if you are repaying a loan to the bank with the money you're earning from a job, where did that money come from? It was also lent at interest to your employer, so your employer could pay you. Or let's say you're selling something you own that someone you sold to that someone who has you have sold to has borrowed at interest to pay you for the goods or services you provide as well. Every pound, dollar, euro is owed by somebody to somebody else. And the whole lot is ultimately owned to the banks, and they are always owed more than was previously created. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a pyramid scheme. Quite simply, it is a massive, massive global Ponzi scheme. It is a game of musical chairs where many people have to lose in order for the flawed logic of the system to be maintained. Wealth is transferred upwards from those with less to those with more, by magnifying the level of debt at every new level of the pyramid. And it's actually reinforced on another level by the application of interest between accounts. Here's how, and you'll be familiar with this one, it's not new. An account with £1 million in it will accrue interest. At 5% interest, it'll produce 50 grand in 1 year. Not from contributions to society that you earn, or that earn you credits, but from simply having money to begin with. Similarly, a poor person's debt to a bank via an overdraft facility or the need to survive on loans accrues interest. This interest, theoretically, is what is used to pay the interest to the account of the person possessing $1 million. In other words, the transference of wealth from the poor to the rich is driven by the inherent inequality of the system which is produced in the first place. And with only the very rich, the owners of the system, the commercial, the ultimately central banks, like the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve of the United States, which is another private institution, these are the only true winners. The modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding sleight of hand that has ever been invented. Those aren't my words, they're the words of Lord Stamp, a Bank of England director in 1937. This is thoroughly recognised by the people who run this system. It is not some secret, it is admitted openly. Ask a banking friend, they'll tell you. So, what is wrong with this system, other than that it is legalised fraud by a private closed-loop banking cartel based on cloud cuckoo land logic? Apart from that. Well, far more serious than a monetary system which generates, encourages and necessitates debt, servitude, poverty and ultimately war, to say nothing of the fact that wars are funded on both sides by exactly the same people, which are essentially the banking cartel. Far worse than this are the side effects of a monetary system when it comes to the fundamentally most important aspect of global societies, and that is the access to and management of the world's natural resources, without which no society would ever flourish or even begin to develop without. So, part 3. This section looks at the use of how the use of profit-based system of exchange actually affects societies in other ways than just purely debt. We've already denoted how money of any kind has historically been employed by a society to manage scarcity of resources. This is in fact the only functionally relevant attribute of a monetary system at all, for it was originally conceived to ensure fair and sustainable balance between what was put in and what comes out of a society, and what one can get out to benefit oneself amid the sparse conditions that we first had when we were hunter-gatherers and the earlier part of our Neolithic revolution. For having a lot of money itself doesn't actually enhance your life. It doesn't feed you, food does. Money does not make your car run. You may garner a little heat from it if you set it alight, but the only thing benefiting you there is the energy from a fire. You would get the same from kindling or newspaper. Personally, I would recommend an unread copy of the Daily Mail as an excellent fuel base for a nice big bonfire, but that is just me. Money does nothing. It is the access to resources, be they food, water, housing, technological conveniences, transport, or any other life-enhancing object or service that makes for a better life. Millionaires aren't healthier, safer, or more well-fed because of their money. It is their access to abundance that makes their life so plush to begin with. Despite this truth, profit remains the primary focus and goal of a monetary system ahead of social concern and human well-being. And you can never have enough profit, ask any CEO. For to gain a greater advantage over another in this system is to achieve a measure of security, to be rewarded by more money, and in turn better access to what resources are available. And since none of us can live without resources, our very survival amid competition-riddled marketplaces, now global in scale, is down to our ability to compete as unfairly as possible. If you're not growing, you're dying. So goes the old adage, without a hint of irony that precisely the opposite is true if you're speaking about the survival of anything within a finite environment. The way that we've now structured our planet is on the basis of finite energy resources and inefficient use of space. I come back to John McMurtry, whose analysis of our present global paradigm compares the situation very much to cancer. It grows for the sake of growth, ignoring limitations and thus its own future sustainability. Not only is it mathematically impossible, it is ecologically destructive to chase profit and growth. Follow this chain of events. We harvest food from an impoverished country because it is cheaper to do so, often to the detriment of that society in the form of poorly paid jobs and significant loss of the resources to foreign economies. It is then transported to a facility which employs slave labour because it is cheaper. Then derivative products are then very often transported yet again, produced and processed in another factory, then transported across the country to a distribution centre, and then ultimately to the world. The reason for this, people in countries where those fruits or items aren't naturally occurring are more likely to pay for them in greater numbers. And also because this inefficient process is cheaper than fluid, efficient, streamlined production. A profit motive orientated system demands inefficiencies. For those very inefficiencies are the cost savings to be made at the expense of the environment and the well-being of humanity. You can rail against polluting companies and carbon footprints all you want for destroying the planet. The bottom line is, the system any institution operates in requires this behaviour. It is utterly expected when you really look at the logic of the market system. As of 1999, 99% of materials used in the production cycle in the USA end up as waste within 6 weeks. Every ton of garbage requires 5 tons of materials to produce it. And those 5 tons took 25 tons of materials harvested and mined from nature to produce it. It is a hugely wasteful system. Almost nothing that we produce or process actually ends up being used at all. I'm trying to convey to you just how inefficient this is. Inefficiency is a good thing, a necessary thing, if you're operating in a monetary system. On a related note, where do you think this comes from? Other than inefficient systems applications in industrial processes, the vast consumer waste produced on a global scale is a huge danger to our survival. Not only does it pollute our world with plastic, chemicals, and unsightliness, it is a visual demonstration that the resources we're burning through for the sake of profit are as vast as they are. The necessity of infinite growth-based consumption and profit-driven production of goods means 3 inescapable ramifications to the societies which operate under a monetary system. We must keep spending more on products.